In the year 2000, two men boarded a flight to Dallas, Texas, carrying the future in their pockets. They walked into the headquarters of Blockbuster Video, the most powerful name in home entertainment on the planet, and they made an offer. They wanted to sell their entire company, the whole thing, for $50 million. Blockbuster's executives could barely keep a straight face. The little company sitting across the table was hemorrhaging money. Its big idea was mailing DVDs around in little red envelopes. To a company with thousands of stores and billions in revenue, it looked like a toy. So they said no.
No! God, please, no! No!
By some accounts, they practically laughed the two men out of the building. That little company was called Netflix. Today, it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and Blockbuster has been all but erased from the face of the earth. It's the perfect story, isn't it? The arrogant giant who laughed at the future and got what it deserved. Except, here's the part almost nobody tells you. Turning down Netflix wasn't the mistake that killed Blockbuster, not even close, because a few years later, Blockbuster came within inches of saving itself. And what they did next is one of the most baffling, self-inflicted collapses in business history. To understand it, we have to go back to the beginning, because before Blockbuster was a punchline, it was a phenomenon. And it all started with one man who wasn't even that interested in movies. In 1985, a man named David Cook opened the very first Blockbuster store in Dallas. Cook didn't come from Hollywood. He came from data. His background was in writing software for the oil industry, building systems to crunch enormous amounts of information. And when he looked at the video rental business, he didn't see movies. He saw a data problem waiting to be solved. Back then, most video stores were small, messy, mom-and-pop operations. They stocked whatever the owner felt like, and half the time, the movie you actually wanted was checked out, or never there at all. Cook's insight was simple but powerful. Use computers to track every single rental, study each neighborhood, and stock each store with exactly what the local customers wanted. A store in a quiet family suburb carried different movies than one near a college campus. Nobody had ever run video rental like that before. And he wrapped the whole thing in an experience that felt like the future. Walk into an early Blockbuster and it was bright, clean, and enormous. Thousands of titles. A whole glowing wall of new releases right by the door. You got a laminated membership card with your name on it. It felt like joining a club. And it was deliberately family-friendly. Blockbuster famously refused to carry adult films, which made it the place parents felt safe taking their kids on a Friday night. It caught fire almost immediately, but the man who turned that good idea into a world-conquering empire wasn't Cook, it was Wayne Huizenga. Huizenga was a different kind of animal. He had already built one fortune by turning a garbage hauling company, Waste Management, into a giant. And he understood one thing better than almost anyone alive: how to take a simple, repeatable business and scale it to the moon. In 1987, he looked at Blockbuster, saw the machine Cook had built, and bought his way in. And then he stepped on the gas. What happened next sounds made up. Under Huizenga, Blockbuster expanded at a pace the industry had never seen. At its peak, the company was opening a brand new store almost every single day. Day after day, another blue and yellow sign lit up somewhere in America. Then they crossed oceans. Blockbuster went global. By the early 1990s, Blockbuster hadn't just won, it had basically swallowed the entire industry whole. And in 1994, Huizenga sold the empire to the media giant Viacom for around $8.4 billion. Let that sink in, for a company that rented out plastic tapes. At its absolute peak, Blockbuster would run something like 9,000 stores around the world and employ tens of thousands of people. The Friday night trip to Blockbuster wasn't just a habit, it was a ritual, woven right into the fabric of American life. It looked completely, permanently invincible. But hidden inside that empire was a single flaw. And the cruelest part, that flaw was the very same thing that was making them so rich. Here's something most people never stopped to realize about Blockbuster. A massive chunk of the company's profit didn't come from renting you a movie. It came from punishing you for bringing that movie back late.
No more late fees! No more late fees! No more late fees! No more late fees!
Late fees. That was the hidden engine under the whole operation. You'd rent a tape, you'd forget to return it, life would get in the way, and a few days later, you'd owe a fee that sometimes cost more than the rental itself. You know the feeling. that little jolt of dread when you spotted the overdue tape sitting on top of the TV. That feeling, that was Blockbuster's profit margin. Now, multiply that small, nagging guilt by tens of millions of customers, month after month, year after year. The numbers get staggering. In the year 2000 alone, Blockbuster pulled in nearly $800 million from late fees, around 16% of its entire revenue. It wasn't a side effect of the business. In a very real way, it was the business. And if you stop and think about it, that is a deeply strange way to make money. The company's profits were tied directly to irritating its own customers. Every late fee was a tiny spark of resentment, and Blockbuster was lighting millions of them. People complained about Blockbuster late fees the way they complained about parking tickets. It was just the price you paid for movie night. But here's the problem with a business built on a captive, annoyed customer base. It only works as long as those customers have nowhere else to go. As long as Blockbuster was the only game in town, all that resentment didn't cost them a dime. People grumbled, paid the fee, and came back next Friday. Because what was the alternative? And then, quietly, out in California, someone built the alternative. Two men started a company around one simple, devastating idea. What if you could rent all the movies you wanted, and there were no late fees at all, ever? Those two men were Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. And as the legend goes, the whole thing was born out of a Blockbuster late fee. Hastings supposedly got hit with a $40 charge for returning a copy of Apollo 13 long past its due date, and he walked away wondering if there was a better way. Whether that story is the literal truth or just a perfect origin myth, the idea behind it was very real. They built their entire company out of everything people hated about Blockbuster. Their idea was Netflix. And in the beginning, it was almost laughably modest. No stores, no shelves. You went to a website, picked your movies, and they showed up in your mailbox in those now iconic red envelopes. You watched them whenever you wanted, and mailed them back whenever you wanted. No due dates, no late fees, no driving anywhere. But here's what people forget. In the year 2000, Netflix wasn't a juggernaut. It was small, fragile, and bleeding cash. The dot-com bubble was bursting. Investment money was drying up everywhere, and Netflix was genuinely afraid it might not survive. They needed a lifeline, so they went to the one company on Earth that could hand them one. Hastings and Randolph flew to Dallas, walked into Blockbuster's headquarters, and put it on the table. Buy us. $50 million, and Netflix becomes Blockbuster.com, your ready-made online arm. And Blockbuster, sitting on its empire of 9,000 stores and its mountain of late fee cash, looked at this little money-losing startup and said, no thanks. The single greatest bargain in the history of entertainment, got up, walked out, and flew home. And for a few years, honestly, it looked like the right call. Netflix stayed small, Blockbuster stayed everywhere. The giant kept printing money. But underneath the surface, the ground was already shifting. And this is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody remembers. Because Blockbuster did not just sit there and rot. Around this time, a sharp new CEO named John Antioco took over. And Antioco understood the threat far better than history gives him credit for. He looked at Netflix, he looked at the internet, and he decided Blockbuster was going to fight back, hard. He made two enormous moves. First, he launched Blockbuster Online, the company's own DVD by mail service, built to attack Netflix on its own turf. And then, he did something genuinely radical. In 2005, Antioco went after the sacred cow itself. He decided to abolish the one thing customers hated most. He killed late fees. It was a staggering decision. It meant walking away from a revenue stream worth, by some accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars. He was willing to burn the old money to win the future. And it was working. Blockbuster fused its thousands of physical stores together with its online service into a program called Total Access. And it was frankly brilliant. You could order a movie online, then drop the DVD back at a real Blockbuster store and walk out with a fresh rental in your hand that very same minute. Netflix, with no stores anywhere, simply could not match that. It was the one thing the giant could do that the startup never could. And customers noticed. Blockbuster started pulling subscribers away from Netflix in serious numbers. And here's the part that sounds impossible today. Netflix was scared. Reed Hastings himself would later admit how nervous Blockbuster's comeback made them. The giant had the brand, it had the stores, it had the customers, and now, at last, it had the right strategy too. Blockbuster was standing right on the edge of one of the greatest comebacks in business history. They had the lifeboat in both hands. And then, unbelievably, they threw it overboard. Here's where Blockbuster falls apart. And the thing that kills it doesn't come from Netflix or streaming or some new technology. It comes from inside Blockbuster's own boardroom. Antioco's turnaround was bold, but it was expensive. Abolishing late fees and building a national online service cost a fortune up front, and it took a real bite out of short-term profits. The strategy was a bet on the future, and bets on the future always look like losses in the present. And there was one man who stared at those short-term losses and saw red: the legendary corporate raider, Carl Icahn. If the name doesn't ring a bell, Carl Icahn is one of the most feared activist investors who ever lived. The kind of man who buys a huge chunk of a company and then bends it to his will. He had taken a major stake in Blockbuster, and he was furious watching Antioco pour the company's profits into this costly bet on the internet. Icahn wanted the money now. Antioco wanted to build the future, and the two of them went to war. It got ugly. A brutal public battle for control of the company. Over strategy, over spending, even over Antioco's pay. And in the end, the man with the winning plan lost the fight. In 2007, John Antioco, the CEO whose strategy was actually beating Netflix, was pushed out the door. His replacement was a man named Jim Keyes. And Keyes looked at everything Antioco had built and set about undoing it. He pulled back hard on the online push. And then he did the single most baffling thing in this entire story. He brought the late fees back. Stop and picture that for a second. At the exact moment customers finally had a cheaper, friendlier, easier option sitting right there waiting for them, Blockbuster turned around and reinstated the one thing that had made everyone resent them in the first place. It was like watching a man claw his way out of a pit, stand right at the edge, and then deliberately jump back in. And the timing could not possibly have been worse. In 2007, the very same year Antioco was forced out, Netflix flipped a switch and launched streaming. Movies and shows beamed instantly over the internet. No disc, no mailbox, no waiting at all. And at the same time, those bright red Redbox kiosks started appearing outside every grocery store in America, renting DVDs for $1. Blockbuster was suddenly being squeezed from every direction at once, and it had nothing left to fight with. The company was buried under something like $1 billion of debt, the long hangover from years of corporate deals and ownership shuffles. There was no cushion, no room to maneuver. The losses started, and then they snowballed. Stores began to close. First a few, then hundreds, then thousands. The empire was caving in on itself. In 2010, the unthinkable became official. Blockbuster, the company that could have bought Netflix for pocket change, the company that once opened a new store every single day, filed for bankruptcy. The next year, the scraps of the empire were sold off to the Dish Network for around $320 million. Tiny fraction of what Blockbuster had once been worth. And across the country, one by one, the glowing blue and yellow signs went dark for good. Today, there is exactly one Blockbuster store left standing on the entire planet, a single location in Bend, Oregon. It's become a kind of living museum. People fly in from all over the world just to walk the aisles, to take a photo under the sign, to feel, for a few minutes, what a Friday night used to feel like before the whole world changed. And Netflix, the little company they laughed out of the room, the one they could have owned outright for $50 million, it is now worth hundreds of billions. And it didn't just beat Blockbuster, it rewired the way the entire planet watches movies and television. So what actually killed Blockbuster? The easy answer, the one everyone repeats, is that they were dinosaurs who never saw the meteor coming. But that answer is simply wrong. They saw it. They saw Netflix clearly. They built a genuine competitor. They even fixed the late fee problem that everyone hated. They had both hands firmly on the lifeboat. What killed Blockbuster was letting go of it. It was internal politics. It was a boardroom power struggle between a CEO who could see the future and an investor who only cared about the present. And underneath all of it, it was a fatal addiction to the easy money of late fees, the very thing their own customers hated most. When the moment of truth finally came, and Blockbuster had to choose between protecting its old profits and securing its future, it chose the past. And that is the real lesson buried in all of this. Blockbuster didn't lose because it couldn't come up with a better idea. It came up with the better idea, twice. It lost because it couldn't bring itself to hold on to it. In the one moment that mattered, it flinched. So the next time a company, or honestly, a person, tells you they're just going to stick with what's always worked, remember the empire of 9,000 stores. Remember that it didn't fall because it failed to change. It fell because in the single moment that mattered most, it refused to.